A Mother's Promise. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a second. Have you liked this video? You won't want to miss a single detail of this incredible transformation. He told her, "I don't want a pregnant girlfriend." 5 years later, he walked into a dazzling gala and came face to face with 3 little girls who looked exactly like him. It was a late evening in London, and the city, seen through the massive windows of Apex Innovations Corp. Headquarters, pulsed with neon lights. But inside the elegant minimalist office on the 33rd floor, the air was heavy and cold. Elena stood by the window, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small, folded piece of paper. Her breath quickened as she looked at Javier Navarro, the man who once whispered dreams in her ear and now looked at her like a stranger. He was everything the magazine said: sharp, powerful, devastatingly handsome, with piercing dark eyes and hair like sculpted ebony. But tonight, he seemed distant. "Chilly," she said, her voice soft but firm, though her stomach was knotted with fear. "I'm pregnant." Javier didn't react at first. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tense. His silence was more deafening than any scream. "How far along?" he asked after a long pause. His voice was low and measured, as if he were discussing quarterly losses instead of the lives they had created. 11 weeks, she said. "It's triplets." That word seemed to change something in the air. He blinked once. Then he exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers to his temple, as if this were a negotiation gone bad. "This can't be happening," he muttered. Then, louder, more firmly, "Elena, I'm not ready for this. I'm not that guy. You know who I am." She looked at him, her eyes burning. "I thought I did." He stood abruptly and walked to the bar in the corner of the room. He poured himself a drink. He didn't offer her one. He drank in silence for a few seconds before turning to face her. "I can give you money, whatever you need, but I can't be a part of this. I have my company, my life. This isn't part of the plan." Elena felt her heart tearing, slowly and cruelly. "They're not a plan, Javier. They're people. Our children." "No," he said firmly. "They're your responsibility. I never asked for this." He pulled out a checkbook and scribbled something quickly. He ripped out the page and placed it on the edge of his desk, not even looking at her. "This should cover what you need, doctors. Whatever." She stared at the paper but didn't touch it. The amount didn't matter. He could have offered her £1,000,000, and it would have been the same. What she needed, he had just torn away with a single sentence. "I don't want your money," she said in a low voice. "I wanted your honesty, your support, your decency." "You'll be fine," he said, already turning his back on her. "You're strong. You don't need me." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You're right, I don't." Without another word, she walked out, clutching the ultrasound image against her chest like a shield. The receptionist didn't look up as she passed. The elevator ride felt like free fall. As the doors closed, Elena wiped a single tear from her cheek and whispered to the 3 lives within her, "I've got you, I promise." And though her world had just shattered, something inside her began to glow, fragile but fierce. A new life. A new city. Winter came early that year to Brighton. The cold wind whipped through the streets of the North Lane like a warning, whispering in every crack and crevice that life would not be easy. Elena found herself living in a small, run-down 5th-floor walk-up apartment, a world away from the glittering life she used to inhabit when Javier was by her side. The floorboards creaked with every step, the windows barely kept out the cold, and the radiator hissed as if it hated her. But it was hers. The rent was late more often than not, and her upstairs neighbor played music so loud it would wake the dead. But at least no one could tell her to leave. Not yet. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, when she could stay on her feet long enough. Her mornings started at a cafe on Gardner Street, where she served coffee to construction workers and city employees who barely noticed her growing belly. Her afternoons were spent cleaning classrooms at a local school, pushing a mop down fluorescent-lit hallways until her back ached. Weekends, she took odd jobs, folding laundry for elderly ladies, organizing closets, even sewing curtains for neighbors when they learned she had a knack for it. Every pound mattered, but it was never enough. The hospital bills piled up. Doctors told her that carrying triplets was high risk for the babies and for her. The words, absolute bed rest, came up often, but she couldn't afford to rest. There was no partner to help, no family to lean on. Her parents had disowned her after she refused to say who the father was. "We didn't raise you to be careless," her mother had snapped during their last call. "If you make your bed, you lie in it alone." So she did, alone. Some nights, Elena would lie on the sagging mattress in her tiny bedroom, her hands pressed against her stomach, whispering to the 3 heartbeats growing inside her. She gave them names before she had even seen their faces: Ava, Luna, and Stella. She talked to them as if they were already there, promising they would be safe, that she wouldn't break. She told them stories, read them old library children's books, and sang softly. Even when tears soaked her pillow, there were moments she almost gave up. The night her legs gave out on the subway platform, and no one helped her up. The time she fainted in the cafe's bathroom from exhaustion and had to pull herself up using the sink. The winter she had her heat turned off for 3 days and huddled under 4 layers of blankets, praying her body would keep the babies warm. But each time she hit that wall, something invisible propelled her forward, a flutter in her belly, a small kick, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Her doctor warned her during the 7th month, "You need to slow down. One bad fall, and all 3 of them could be in danger." Elena nodded, but went back to work the next day anyway. Giving up wasn't an option. She wrote her birth plan in a spiral notebook, and while it was short on details, no family, no husband, no one waiting in the hallway, she held on to it like a lifeline. And then, in the early hours of a rainy Tuesday, her water broke as she was walking home from her night shift. She was soaked, limping, clutching her belly and panting, alone on a mostly empty street. A passing taxi saw her and stopped. She couldn't even speak through the pain. She just pointed to her stomach. The driver rushed her to the emergency room, yelling at the nurses as they wheeled her away. The next few hours were a blur of lights, pain, and panic. But at 5:46 a.m., after an exhausting emergency C-section, the room went quiet. Then it filled with 3 high, overlapping cries. Ava was first, then Luna, then Stella. They were tiny, impossibly small, each wrapped in a pink blanket, their eyes closed, but their faces peaceful. "Triplets," a nurse whispered, "and they're strong." Elena lay still, tears streaming down her cheeks, weak, stitched up, and bloated, every part of her body aching. But in that moment, she had never felt more alive. The hospital let her hold them, just for a minute each before they were taken to the nursery. But it was enough. She had seen their faces, 3 little girls with blue eyes like frozen lakes and soft blonde tufts of hair. They looked like Javier, painfully, unmistakably, like him. But they were hers. They were her reason. She spent the next weeks recovering. She could barely walk, but she was determined to feed and visit the babies every 3 hours. She learned to hold 2 at a time while bottle feeding the 3rd. She learned to interpret their cries, their breathing, their sleep patterns. She smiled through her exhaustion and kissed each forehead, whispering promises she would die to keep. Elena had no savings, and the hospital bills were crushing. But she refused to ask for help. Each day, she grew stronger. Each hour, the girls gained weight. And a month later, all three were discharged, together. She pushed their stroller down the street with trembling arms and a defiant heart. No father, no family, no safety net. But she had them. She had 3 reasons to fight, and a fire inside her that no one could extinguish. As she turned the corner onto her street, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. Elena smiled at the sky. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the beginning. Building an empire of love. The first year was about survival. Elena barely remembered the passing seasons, only the rhythm of feedings, diapers, and sleepless nights. Every day bled into the next, measured not by hours, but by cries and coos, by bottles and lullabies, by the weight of 3 tiny bodies depending entirely on her. Her apartment was too small, too cold in the winter, too hot in the summer, and filled with the constant noise of life. Not the peaceful kind, but the beautiful chaos of childhood multiplied by 3. But even through the exhaustion, she found moments of quiet. When all 3 girls were asleep, their chests rising and falling in unison, Elena would sit on the floor, lean her back against the crib, and let herself breathe. Sometimes she would cry, not from sadness, but because the love she felt for them was too big for her chest. She quickly discovered that raising 3 daughters alone was not only emotionally overwhelming, but logistically a nightmare. Even going to the supermarket required planning, patience, and 3 of everything. Diapers, formula, clothes, socks that constantly disappeared in the wash. She learned to carry 2 babies in carriers, strapped to her chest and back, with 1 in the stroller. She learned to feed them simultaneously, to burp them in shifts, and to sleep in 10-minute intervals, like a soldier on guard. She had no one to lean on, no partner to pass the crying baby to at 3 a.m., no grandparent to call with casseroles. But she had something else, an unbreakable will. It was around their 2nd year that the world began to notice them. Strangers would stop her on the street to marvel at the girls, 3 little blonde, blue-eyed angels, who looked more like dolls than real children. They commanded attention everywhere they went, and not just because of their looks. Ava was the bold one, always leading with curiosity. Luna was the quiet observer, studying everyone with her big eyes. Stella was the heart, the first to hug, the first to cry when someone else did, the one whose laughter was like music. One day at the park, a woman approached Elena as the girls played near the sandbox. She introduced herself as a stylist for children's catalogs and asked if she would be open to letting the girls model for a small brand. At first, Elena refused. She didn't want them exposed to anything artificial. She didn't want them treated like little accessories. But after the rent went up again and she was almost out of money for formula, she called the woman back. The session was simple. Soft lighting, pastel backgrounds, tiny dresses. Elena watched intently the entire time, never letting the girls out of her sight. But they had fun. They posed as if it were a game, giggling and playing with the props. The brand loved the results and asked to hire them again. That one job turned into 2, then 5. The money helped, but Elena remained cautious. She maintained full control of their time and said no to anything that felt exploitative. She turned down offers that wanted to separate the girls or push them for long studio hours. They would have a normal life, even if their faces were starting to appear in catalogs and boutique children's clothing line ads. At the same time, Elena started to sew again. She had learned as a teenager from her grandmother, who used to make dresses on an old Singer sewing machine in their hometown in Cornwall. At first, she only made outfits for the girls, simple, beautiful things that fit them perfectly, because no store sold 3 identical dresses that also allowed each girl to feel unique. Other mothers in the neighborhood noticed and began asking her for commissions. Elena would sew at night after the girls went to bed, sometimes with Ava curled up at her feet, or Stella snoring softly on her shoulder. She sewed in silence, bathed in the soft lamplight, her hands steady even when her heart was not. One day, a local photographer asked if he could use Elena's dresses in a children's photo shoot. Elena agreed, and the photos unexpectedly went viral. Her email inbox was flooded with messages from people asking where they could buy the clothes. She didn't even have a brand name yet. She quickly made a simple website using a free builder and called the line 3 Little Lights, in honor of her daughters, the only light that had guided her through years of darkness. Orders started coming in faster than she could fulfill them. She bought fabric in bulk from a supplier in the city and converted half of the apartment into a sewing studio. The girls would play at her feet while she worked, and sometimes she would sew with one hand while feeding Stella with the other. It was chaos, but it was hers. By the time the girls turned 4, Elena had moved into a slightly bigger apartment, still in Brighton, but with more sunlight and a second bedroom. The boutique modeling continued, but on her terms. Her clothing line had steadily grown, with influencers and parenting blogs calling her the mother who turned struggle into style. She was even interviewed for a local news segment. When the reporter asked her how she did it all alone, Elena simply smiled and said, "I didn't do it alone. I had 3 little reasons to keep going." The girls thrived. They were inseparable, but distinct. Elena encouraged them to develop their own identities, different favorite colors, different bedtime stories, different dreams. Ava wanted to be a veterinarian. Luna loved books about space. Stella wanted to sing on a stage. Elena didn't know how she would afford those dreams, but she was determined to give them everything she could. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she still thought about Javier, not with bitterness, but with a kind of empty wonder. If he had changed, if he would feel anything if he saw their faces. She never sought him out, never tried to track him down or show him what he had abandoned. That part of her life was a closed door, or so she thought. What she didn't know was that life wasn't done surprising her, that everything she had built from the ashes was about to be put to the test. But for now, she sewed late into the night, 3 little girls sleeping down the hall, and she believed for the first time that she might finally be reaching some place close to peace. The gala and the unexpected encounter. The invitation arrived in a thick ivory cardstock, the kind of paper that smelled like money. The golden letters glistened under the kitchen light as Elena read it for the 3rd time. It was an invitation to the London Businesswomen's Gala, a prestigious annual event filled with investors, fashion icons, and elite entrepreneurs. She had never been invited to anything like this before, not even close. When she first opened it, she thought it must be a mistake, but the note inside was addressed directly to her, praising the recent success of 3 Little Lights and requesting her presence as an honored guest among other rising stars in business. For a long time, she just stood there, holding it. Her heart beat with strange rhythms. She wasn't sure if she should go. There was a voice inside her, quiet but sharp, that whispered she didn't belong in rooms like these. That voice sounded a lot like the old Elena, the one who had stood alone outside the hospital 5 years ago with 3 newborns and nothing but a bus fare. But the girls had changed that. Her work had changed that. She was no longer just surviving. She was building something. She had employees, clients, a brand people recognized, and if she wanted to grow it further, she had to step into the very rooms she had once feared. So she said yes. The night of the gala arrived in a whirlwind of chaos. The girls were more excited than she was, twirling around her in the living room as she got dressed. She wore a midnight blue dress she had designed herself. Elegant, timeless, simple. Her hair was pulled back in soft waves, and for once, she allowed herself to look like she belonged. Ava gasped and said she looked like a queen. Luna asked if she was nervous. Stella insisted she bring one of her friendship bracelets. In case you miss me too much. She tied it onto Elena's wrist with a solemn ceremony. Elena left them with her trusted neighbor and got into the hired car, her heart pounding as the city skyline came into view. The event was held at a venue with glass walls in London's financial district, with chandeliers like shooting stars and waiters offering champagne the moment guests walked in. She walked through the entrance like someone crossing into a different life, unsure if she was welcome, but determined not to back down. For a while, she mingled discreetly. People introduced themselves, asked polite questions, praised her clothing line, asked about her daughters. Then they would drift away to someone more powerful. She smiled through it all, grateful, but also wary. The room was full of people who had always lived above the clouds, and even though she wore a dress that belonged, she still felt the weight of the ground beneath her feet. She was standing near a marble bar, sipping sparkling water when she heard his voice. It came from across the room, unmistakable. Deeper now, perhaps more weathered, but still the same. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly. There he was, Javier Navarro. He was talking to someone in a slick black suit, a drink in his hand, his hair still immaculately styled, his posture as confident and untroubled by consequence as she remembered. But time had etched some changes. There were lines around his eyes now, and something heavier in his expression. When he wasn't speaking, the moment he turned and saw her, the glass in his hand stopped, halfway to his lips. For a second, the world blurred. Then his eyes dropped, and she saw it. Confusion, disbelief, recognition, all of it crashing into him like a silent car wreck. His gaze flickered to the friendship bracelet on her wrist, then back to her face. She held his stare with a quiet calm. She had imagined this moment more times than she could count, and now that it was real, she felt strangely in control. She was no longer the girl begging him to see her. She owed him nothing. Before he could approach her, a new sound cut through the air. Small footsteps. 3 little girls stood in the doorway, dressed in matching cream-colored dresses, with curly hair and bright blue eyes. Elena froze. She hadn't brought them. The neighbor had been invited to the family event being held upstairs, a section for businesswomen, who were also mothers. The girls had apparently gotten bored and insisted on coming to find their mom. Security must have let them in with their babysitter. Recognizing Elena's name on the guest list, Javier turned and saw them. The moment his eyes landed on the girls, something inside him snapped wide open. His jaw went slack. He took an unconscious step forward. The resemblance was undeniable. It hit him like a punch. Their eyes, the shape of their mouths, their hair, their expressions. 3 perfect mirrors of a face he saw every day in his own reflection. Ava noticed him first. She tugged on Elena's dress. "Mommy, who's that man staring at us?" Elena's throat tightened. She didn't answer right away. She knelt down and gently took her daughter's hands. Javier took another step, slower this time. He wasn't smiling. His face was pale, stunned, almost ghostly. He opened his mouth to speak. Then he closed it. His hands were trembling. For the first time in the 5 years since she had seen him, he looked lost. "Elena," he finally said. His voice was rough. She didn't respond. Not yet. All around them, the gala was still lively. Guests laughing, music swelling, crystal glasses clinking. But in that moment, the room shrank to the space between the man who had abandoned his daughters and the woman who had raised them without him. Javier looked at the girls, then back at her. His lips parted. But whatever he wanted to say, it got stuck in his throat. Elena stood tall, the soft weight of her daughters anchoring her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel small in his presence. She felt powerful, not the kind that came from money or fame, but the kind born of pain, resilience, and love, multiplied by 3. And Javier, for all his success, looked like a man watching a miracle he hadn't earned. She turned to the girls and smiled. "Come on, my loves. Let's go meet the people who know what real work is." Then she walked past him without another look, her daughters by her side, leaving him behind in a silence much louder than anything she could have said. A second chance. The morning after the gala, Elena woke up with a strange heaviness in the air, the kind that clings to your skin like a fog. The girls were still asleep, their small bodies tangled in blankets, their faces peaceful and untouched by the storm brewing just outside their world. Elena sat in the kitchen with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold, looking at the bracelet around her wrist, the one Stella had tied on her before the event. She hadn't taken it off. She knew he would find her. She could feel it. It didn't take long. By noon, an email appeared in her inbox. No subject, no introduction, just a single question. "Are they mine?" She didn't reply. Not right away. She spent the rest of the day in her workshop, sewing in near total silence while her assistant handled the front. The girls played in the back with fabric scraps and buttons, oblivious to the history breathing down their necks. Elena couldn't concentrate. Her hands slipped. Her stitches were uneven. She kept thinking about his face at the gala. Not arrogant, not smug, not cold. Just shocked, as if someone had held up a mirror he didn't know existed. 2 days passed. Another message came. "I need to see you, please. Just talk," she replied this time. One line. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m., my studio. Alone." When he walked in, she was already waiting, sitting on a stool by a rack of spring dresses. She didn't stand up. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds. Then he walked slowly toward her, his hands in his coat pockets, as if he didn't know what to do with them. He looked different in the daylight, less polished, more human. He had bags under his eyes and hadn't shaved. She wondered for one brief, strange second if he had slept at all since that night. "They're yours," she said before he could speak. Her voice was flat, unemotional. "All 3 of them." Javier let out a shaky breath and sat across from her, his movements careful, as if he were afraid of shattering the air between them. "I had no idea," he said. "Not even a suspicion. If I had—" "Yes, you did," she cut in, her voice low. "I told you. I said I was pregnant. I told you I needed you." His face contorted. "I was a coward. I thought you were bluffing, that it would go away, that I could keep my life intact. You could have asked. One call, one message, in 5 years." He nodded slowly. Shame radiated from him like heat. "I have no excuse. I've tried to find one, but there isn't one. I was selfish, and stupid, and scared." Elena stood up then, walking to the sewing table, turning her back to him. "Do you know what it's like to give birth to 3 babies with no one waiting outside the delivery room? she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. To hold them, and realize you have to become everything. Mother, father, protector, provider. Oh, they won't make it. He said nothing. She turned slowly. Do you know how many nights I went without eating because there wasn't enough for all of us? How many days I carried 2 on my chest and pushed the 3rd in a stroller through the snow just to get to work? Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She didn't dare. I wasn't trying to punish you, she continued. I didn't tell the world your name. I didn't chase you down. I wasn't waiting for a grand apology. I just moved on because I had to. I want to meet them, he said finally, his voice raw. I know I don't deserve it. I know it's late, but I want to try. Elena studied him, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. They aren't a prize, Javier. They aren't your redemption arc. I know that. And if I even think about leaving again, I won't. He swallowed hard. I saw them, and something inside me just broke open. They are my daughters. I have lost 5 years, but if you let me, I will spend the rest of my life making it right. She didn't answer right away. Her heart was beating so hard it was difficult to think straight. A part of her wanted to scream, to throw every broken piece of her past in his face. But another part, the exhausted, bruised part, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. I don't know what kind of role you can have, she said slowly. Not yet. They don't know who you are. They've never asked. But if I do tell them, it has to be on my terms. Carefully. You can't just come in and play the hero. He nodded. Of course, I need time, she said. What are the boundaries? Whatever you need, he said. Whatever it takes. For a moment, there was silence. Then Javier reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded photo. He handed it to her without a word. It was an old photo, one she hadn't seen in years. Her and Javier, taken in the early days when everything still seemed possible. She was laughing, leaning into him. He was looking at her as if she were the only thing that existed. I kept it, he said softly, even when I tried to forget everything else. She held the photo for a long time. Then, she slowly folded it and handed it back to him. That man doesn't exist anymore, she said, and neither does that girl. But as she looked at him, older, quieter, bruised in a way that wasn't performative, she didn't slam the door. She didn't yell. She didn't ask him to leave. Instead, she nodded once and said, "Come back tomorrow. We'll talk more. And maybe you can meet them." Then she walked past him and went back to her sewing machine. Not because she didn't care, but because there was still work to be done and 3 little girls down the hall who needed dinner. A foundation of trust. The day of the DNA test was gray. The sky hung low over the city like an ash blanket. Elena didn't want to go. Every part of her body resisted the idea of walking into a sterile building just to prove something she had always known. Something that had shaped her entire life. But she had agreed. Not for Javier. Not to justify anything. She did it for her daughters, so that in the future, if questions ever arose, there would be no ambiguity, no rewritten stories. Just the truth. Printed. Signed. Undeniable. They met at a private clinic in the city center, nestled between a florist and a law office. Javier was already inside when she arrived, sitting in the waiting room, his hands so tightly clasped she could see the color draining from his knuckles. He stood when he saw her, but she didn't offer him a smile. There was no room for pleasantries today. The nurse explained everything quickly and efficiently. It would take a few days to process the results. They took the swabs. Simple. Fast. Mechanical. Elena handed her portion over without a word. Javier hesitated before rubbing the inside of his cheek. His eyes flickered to her once, almost as if he were asking for some kind of reassurance. She gave him none. Once it was done, they walked back out onto the street, and for a moment neither of them moved. Cars sped by on the road. A siren wailed in the distance. Life, oblivious, indifferent, moved on. "I don't need papers to tell me they're mine," Javier said, finally breaking the silence. "But I understand why we had to do it. I can't believe I missed it all. The first words, the first steps, everything." "You didn't miss it," Elena replied, her voice quiet but sharp. "You chose not to be there." He nodded. He didn't argue. That, at least, was progress. When the results came 3 days later, he showed up at her studio, holding the envelope as if it were a verdict. She had already read her copy that morning. The answer, of course, was yes. A 99% match. He was the biological father of Ava, Luna, and Stella. "I don't know why this hits me so hard," he said, his voice trembling as he sat down next to one of the mannequins she used for fittings. "I knew it, but seeing it on paper, I feel like I'm looking at a mirror I broke 5 years ago, and now I'm looking at the pieces." Elena sat across from him, needle in hand, mending a small sleeve. She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer cruel. It was something different now, heavier, more honest. "I want to meet them," Javier said again, properly. "I don't want to just be some stranger they once saw at a fancy party." "They don't know you exist," she said. "Have they asked about a father?" "Yes, but I never told them you left. I just told them they were made with love, and they have each other. They don't feel abandoned. That's because I never let them." She paused, her needle pulling cleanly through the fabric. "If you want to be in their lives, it's not about you. It's about them. And I need to know you're ready for that." "I am," he said quickly, leaning forward. "I know I can never get the lost time back, but I'm not here to erase your work. I'm here to add to it, if you'll let me." His sincerity was uncomfortable, not because she didn't want to believe him, but because a part of her did. And that scared her more than anything else. So she laid down ground rules. She made it clear that any relationship with the girls would start slowly, as a friend of Mommy's, someone kind and safe, who would become familiar over time. No big reveals, no pressure, and absolutely no inconsistency. If he showed up once and then disappeared again, there would be no second chance. He agreed to everything, every boundary, every condition. There was no protest in him, just a quiet determination, the kind that comes from realizing too late how much you've lost. The first meeting happened that weekend. Elena had arranged a quiet afternoon at Regent's Park. Not an overwhelming gathering, just a simple picnic under the trees. The girls wore their favorite outfits, each with her own backpack filled with coloring books, snacks, and treasures they insisted on bringing. Javier arrived in jeans and a sweater, looking more like a schoolteacher than a billionaire. When he saw them, he froze. His face crumbled with something Elena couldn't quite name. Awe, guilt, anguish, joy, all of it. He walked over slowly. Elena knelt down next to the girls and smiled as they looked up. "Girls," she said softly. "This is Javier. He's a friend of mine. He wanted to meet you." Ava, always the brave one, stepped forward first. "Hi, I'm Ava. I'm the oldest. By 2 minutes." Luna followed closely, offering a cautious greeting. "I'm Luna. I like space and stars." Stella smiled and ran over without a second thought. "I'm Stella. I like hugs." When she then hugged Javier's legs without a second thought. He knelt down, his eyes glistening, and hugged her back carefully, as if she might break. "It's a pleasure to meet all of you," he whispered. They spent hours together, drawing, playing with a frisbee, talking about their favorite books. Javier listened more than he talked. He never pushed. He never tried to claim anything. He simply showed up, fully, quietly, and attentively. By the end of the day, Ava declared he was cool for a grown-up. Luna let him help her with her glow-in-the-dark constellation puzzle, and Stella fell asleep with her head in his lap. Elena watched it all from a few feet away, her heart tangled up in 1,000 emotions. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if any of this would last. But something was shifting. Something real. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was on the edge of a cliff. She felt like she was building something solid, something that might last, a future built, not given. For a while, it seemed the storm had passed. Weeks turned into months, and what was once unimaginable became normal. Javier began visiting regularly, always respecting the boundaries Elena had set. He never pushed, he never demanded, and he never missed a scheduled meeting. At first, the girls only saw him in safe, familiar spaces. The park, the studio, their favorite cafe with the animal pancakes. But finally, Elena allowed him into their home, if only for brief visits. He brought books, games, sometimes small craft projects he swore he'd made himself, though Elena suspected a very expensive assistant had helped. The girls adored him, not in a sudden, overwhelming way, but gradually, like a new tree growing among roots that had always been there. They started calling him Mater Javier, then Uncle Javier, and eventually Stella, always the bravest, tried Daddy one afternoon as she climbed onto his lap, her eyes sleepy, her arms around his neck. He didn't react with tears or theatrics. He simply held her a little tighter, as if hearing that word had put something back together inside him. Elena watched it happen without stopping it. She no longer felt the same need to guard every moment from him. He had shown up. He had stayed. But peace has a way of making people nervous, especially those who have lived in chaos for too long. It started with a headline. A tabloid had picked up rumors of Javier's secret children, and the photo they used was an old image of Elena at a charity event, standing with the girls in matching dresses. It hadn't been meant for the public, but someone must have sold it. Suddenly, blogs and gossip sites lit up with speculation. The tech magnate was hiding triplets? Was he the father? Who was the mystery woman from Brighton? The article went viral in hours. Elena's phone started vibrating non-stop. Calls, messages, interview requests, even threats. Her inbox filled with brands asking if the girls could pose with their father for a family campaign. Others accused her of trapping him, of being a gold digger, of lying, of using the girls as leverage. She kept the girls home from school for a week and turned off all notifications. Javier showed up that evening with his fists clenched, his face pale with fury. He had no idea how it had happened. His team was already working on it. He wanted to release a statement, something to protect them, but Elena, calm and sharp, said no. She didn't want the girls used as a shield for his reputation. They weren't a public relations tool. The backlash didn't end. One morning, when Elena went to take out the trash, she found a message spray-painted on her apartment building. Liar. 2 days later, someone left a broken doll on their doorstep. The police couldn't do much. No one had seen anything. Javier came over that night, pacing the living room while the girls played quietly in their room, oblivious to the ugliness of the world. He told her to move. He said he had a private house in the countryside, fully staffed, completely secure, where they would all be safe. "I don't hide," Elena said. "I've never hidden. I raised them in plain sight, in the truth." "You did," he said, his voice raw. "But I'm not running away this time. I'm staying. And if I have to put a wall between them and the world, I will. I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm asking you to let me protect the one you built." It wasn't an easy decision. Elena hated the idea of being seen as weak, of looking like she was leaning on him. But after the third time someone tried to take photos of the girls at the park, after Stella came home crying because a stranger had asked her if her daddy was famous, she agreed. They moved in the middle of the night. Javier arranged everything with precision and silence. 2 black SUVs, a trusted driver, and a small moving crew that packed their lives into boxes under the moonlight. The house was a modern fortress surrounded by trees, miles away from prying eyes. The girls were told it was an adventure, a vacation, something special. And they accepted it with wide-eyed wonder, too young to know it was protection disguised as luxury. Elena struggled the first few weeks. She missed the rhythm of her studio, the cafe on the corner, the freedom of her own space. She hated the silence, but the girls adapted quickly, delighted with the garden, the indoor pool, and the room full of books with beanbags and star lamps. Javier gave them space. He didn't try to take over. He simply became a steady presence, reading bedtime stories, cooking clumsy pancakes on Sundays, driving them to the end of the lane for their homeschooling van, and gradually, without meaning to, Elena softened. There was one night in late October when a thunderstorm knocked out the power for a few minutes. The house went dark, and Stella began to cry. Javier scooped her up and carried her to the fireplace, lighting it by hand while whispering nonsensical stories about rain dragons and lightning cats. Elena stood in the shadows, watching the firelight flicker on his face, and she realized she no longer saw the man who had left her in an office 5 years ago. She saw a man who had been broken by his own fear and was now trying, piece by piece, to earn something real. She didn't trust easily. She didn't forgive entirely. But when Javier fell asleep that night on the sofa, with 2 of the girls draped over him like kittens, she brought him a blanket, draped it over his shoulders, and whispered, "Thank you." She had never said it before. He had never asked for it. But in that moment, it was enough. Because the war was still there, in the headlines, in the past, in the memory of all they had both done wrong. But inside that house, on that night, they were safe. And that was a beginning neither of them had expected to find. Forging a new path, spring came slowly to the London countryside, with frost still clinging to the ground long after the sun rose. The trees outside the estate came back to life, and the garden began to bloom with cautious colors. Inside the house, life had found a rhythm, one Elena never imagined she would experience. The girls had settled into their routines, school in the mornings, crafts in the afternoons, and evenings filled with laughter, books, and long games of make-believe. Their voices echoed through the hallways like wind chimes, clear and ever-present. They had stopped asking when they would go back to Brighton. This was home now. Elena had changed too. She still ran her business remotely, with a quiet efficiency. She still sewed, though the pace had slowed, no longer driven by desperation, but by joy. Her studio had been rebuilt in the east wing of the house, a large, sunny room filled with color and texture and the soft hum of creativity. She took long walks in the mornings before the girls woke up, coffee in hand, allowing herself to breathe deeply without the old weight pressing on her chest. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace, and she had learned over the years to take peace where she could find it. Javier had not only kept his promises, he had exceeded them. He had become a presence in their lives, not through grand gestures, but through consistency. He helped with math homework, attended living room dance recitals, and memorized each girl's bedtime routine without being asked. He knew Ava hated raisins, that Luna needed the nightlight on even though she pretended she didn't, and that Stella couldn't fall asleep unless someone told her a story about the moon. He listened more than he talked. He showed up even on days when work consumed him. And slowly, the girls stopped seeing him as a visitor and started seeing him as a part of them. It had been almost a year since the night they left Brighton, when Javier asked Elena to marry him. It wasn't dramatic. No flash mob, no ring hidden in dessert. It happened one rainy Tuesday afternoon while they were folding laundry. The girls were playing in the other room, giggling about some game only they understood. Javier was holding one of Stella's tiny, soft pink shirts when he looked at Elena and said, "I know this isn't how people usually ask, but I love you, I love them, and I want this, every day. I want to build a life with you, not just around them, but because of them. Will you marry me?" She stared at him, completely surprised. Marriage had never felt like an option after everything. It had seemed like a fantasy other people got to have. But looking at him now, the man who had once walked away from everything, she saw someone who had rebuilt himself piece by piece. She didn't answer right away. She needed to feel the answer in her bones. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house was silent, she sat by the window and thought about all the versions of herself she had been. The 19-year-old girl crying in a bathroom stall, the mother holding 3 newborns alone in a hospital bed, the woman sewing clothes by candlelight, the fighter who stood in front of a man who had broken her and dared him to face what he had left behind. They were all still inside her. But now, so was the woman who had survived it all, who had built a life out of ash, thread, and love. The next morning, she said yes. The wedding was small, with no headlines, no press, just family, the kind you choose, not the kind you inherit. The ceremony was in the garden, under a bower of blooming white flowers, with bird song and laughter filling the air. The girls wore dresses they had helped Elena design, each one unique, but cut from the same fabric. Ava walked ahead with a bouquet almost as big as she was. Luna handed out handmade paper stars to each guest. Stella was the flower girl and refused to walk. She ran down the aisle, giggling, her arms full of petals. Javier was waiting at the end of the path, his suit perfectly tailored, his face soft and full of awe. When Elena appeared in a silk gown she had sewn with her own hands, the entire crowd stood. But Javier didn't notice anyone else. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he never believed he was worthy of, something he is willing to spend the rest of his life earning. They didn't say traditional vows. Instead, they spoke from the heart. Elena promised never to forget what it cost to get there, to never stop protecting the love they had built from the ground up. Javier promised not to fix the past, but to honor it, to walk alongside her and the girls every step forward, no matter how difficult or imperfect. After the ceremony, the girls ran barefoot across the lawn, screaming with joy. Music played, not a playlist, but live. A string quartet hidden under the oak tree, playing soft, warm melodies as evening fell. They danced until the stars came out, and even after. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, Elena lay next to Javier in the bed they now shared. The windows were open, letting in the scent of blooming jasmine. The bracelet Stella had made her, now worn and faded, still wrapped around her wrist. She hadn't taken it off, not even for the wedding. She whispered into the darkness, "Do you ever wonder how different it would have been if you had stayed back then?" He was silent for a long time before he replied, "Every day. But then I remember, if I hadn't left, I might not have become the man I needed to be to deserve this now." She turned to him, her voice firm. "You still have to earn it. Every single day." "I know," he said, And I will. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere down the hall, one of the girls murmured in her sleep. Elena smiled, reached for his hand, and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, there were no alarms in her chest, no claws of doubt clinging to her spine, no fear lurking. Just love, steady and whole, built from ashes and second chances. And this time, it would last. This story isn't just about romance or redemption. It's about earned healing. What makes the story powerful is that it never asks us to forget the pain, the betrayal, or the brutal loneliness Elena endured. Instead, it honors her strength. She didn't wait to be saved. She became the rescuer, for herself and for her daughters. Javier's return isn't a fairy tale fix. It doesn't magically erase the past. He walks through the rubble he created and chooses to rebuild. Slowly, humbly. That is what makes his transformation believable and moving. But the true heart of the story is the evolution of love. Not the fireworks of falling in love, but the deep, quiet kind that is forged in fire, in late-night feedings, in scraped knees, in hard-won trust. It reminds us that family isn't made by blood or by promises once spoken, but by what we do, over and over again. And in the end, the message is simple and beautiful. Second chances aren't given. They are built. What did you think of this powerful story of resilience and second chances? Let us know your opinion in the comments. We'd love to know what part impacted you the most. If this story moved your heart and inspired you, don't forget to like this video. And, of course, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Your support helps us continue to share content that will make you reflect.